She went down between the stove and the prep table, and the sound she made wasn't a crash. It was barely anything, just the soft percussion of a body that had given up, arguing with gravity. The last thing Wren Calloway remembered before the kitchen floor of the Maranzano estate came up to meet her was the smell of the braise she'd been tending for 4 hours. Short ribs, rosemary, the good wine she'd been told to use without being told she could drink it, and the specific moment when the room tilted and she understood distantly that this was going to happen and there was nothing to be done about it. She had eaten half a granola bar at 7 that morning. It was now 9:15 at night. She did not eat the food she cooked. She had been taught this the first day by the kitchen manager, a compact man named Fiorello, who ran the Maranzano household kitchen with the conviction of someone who believed the rules were the rules, because the rules were the rules. The staff ate in the back room at 6. If you missed the 6 o'clock meal, which she had, because the braise had needed her and there was nobody else, and she had not yet learned how to be in 2 places, you missed it. She had missed it 4 times this week. She had been at the estate for 11 days. She had lost 8 pounds before that. In the months since her restaurant had closed, because she was the kind of person who stopped eating when she was afraid, and she had been afraid since October, and it was now December, and the granola bar was from a box she'd bought in a gas station off the I-95, because it was what she could afford. None of this was what she was thinking about when she fell. She wasn't thinking about anything. That was rather the point. She came back to the world slowly, in pieces, warmth first, then light, then the sensation of not being on the floor anymore, which took longer to process than it should have. She was on something soft. A couch, she thought. Her cheek against fabric that was not the kitchen floor. She opened her eyes. A man was sitting in the chair across from her. Dark suit, no tie, his elbows on his knees and his hands loosely linked, and his full attention on her face with the particular undemonstrative quality of someone who has been waiting for her to wake up and intends to understand what happened before he says a word. She had seen him once, from across the kitchen. In her 11 days, she had understood from the quality of the silence that followed him through the house that he was the reason the house existed. His name, she would learn in the next 4 minutes, was Nico Maranzano. He was 38 years old. He was, as of this morning, 9 days from his wedding. He looked at her now the way she imagined he looked at structural problems, with complete focus, no visible alarm, and the settled patience of a man who has decided the answer is coming and will wait for it. "When did you last eat?" he said. Not a question. The tone of someone running a diagnostic. Wren tried to sit up. The room disagreed. She settled for propping on one elbow. "This morning," she said. Her voice came out rougher than she expected. Before that, she thought about the 6 o'clock meal. The braise. The 4 days before that, which had the specific texture of a period she had managed rather than lived. "I'm fine," she said. He looked at her steadily. "You fainted in my kitchen. I know. That's not fine. I know that too." She pushed herself upright. The room was a study, books, a desk, the kind of space that existed for actual use rather than decoration. She was on a leather sofa that was older than anything else in the room and had the particular presence of something that had been sat in by many people over many years. "I'm sorry about the braise." He looked at her for a moment with an expression she couldn't quite read. "The braise is fine," he said. Fiorello finished it. She nodded. She was calculating. 11 days of employment. 1 faint. A man who owned the kitchen watching her come back to consciousness on his study sofa. She ran the math on her options quickly, the way she always ran math, and arrived at the same answer she always arrived at when her options were limited. Stay composed. Be useful. Do not ask for anything. I can go back to the kitchen, she said. You can't, he said. You're going to sit there until someone brings food, and then you're going to eat it, and then you and I are going to have a conversation. She looked at him. Mr. Maranzano, Nico, he said. Not warmth, exactly correction. The precision of someone who dislikes unnecessary formality in private spaces. She looked at her hands. I'm not supposed to eat the family food. You're not, he said. Tonight is different. He looked at her once more. A look that was an entire sentence, and then he stood and went to the door and said something to someone in the hallway in a voice too low for her to catch. He came back. He sat. He did not fill the silence with anything, which she found, to her own surprise, easier than the alternative. She ate what was brought, bread first, then soup, then the short ribs that she had cooked for 4 hours, and that were. She noted with the professional part of her brain that never quite shut off. Exactly right. He watched her eat without making it strange. He drank coffee. He waited. When she put the fork down, he said, "Tell me what's happening." And she, who had not told anyone what was happening since October, because there had been no one to tell, and no margin for the telling, looked at this man she had met 14 minutes ago in the most undignified circumstances available to a human adult. And, because she was very tired and very hungry and the food had unlocked something in her that she had been keeping locked for months, told him. Her name was Wren Calloway. She was 27 years old. She had grown up in South Boston in a family that was loud and warm and financially unstable in the creative, rotating way of families who are always 1 month from fine and never quite arrive there. She had cooked since she was 9. For her mother, for her 3 younger brothers, for the aunts who came on Sundays and expected something real on the table. She had gone to culinary school on a scholarship she had applied for 17 times before she got it. She had worked for 6 years in other people's kitchens, learning the architecture of the craft, and then, 18 months ago, she had opened Wren's, a 40-seat restaurant in the South End that served the kind of food she'd grown up cooking, but done with the technique she'd spent a decade learning. The kind of place that costs everything to open and everything to keep open, and that she had loved with the specific, complete love of something you built with your hands from the ground. She had lost it in October. Not to bad cooking, not to bad reviews. To a landlord who had sold the building to a developer who had given her 30 days. 30 days to close a restaurant she had put $400,000 into, 240 of which was still owed to a bank that did not accept explanations for why the collateral no longer existed. She had spent November negotiating a payment structure that was survivable, and December looking for work and moving into her youngest brother's apartment in Dorchester, where she slept on a pull-out couch and told her mother she was fine every Sunday because her mother had 3 other children to worry about, and 1 crisis at a time was the maximum. The Maranzano position had come through a culinary agency. Private household chef, 6-month contract, residential. The rate was enough to make the first 3 bank payments without missing. She had taken it without asking too many questions about the household, which in retrospect was either brave or foolish, and she had been deciding which for 11 days. She told Nico Maranzano most of this, not all. Not the number, not the bank, not her brother's pull-out couch. Enough, the shape of it, which was, she had built something real and lost it to something arbitrary. And she was here because here was what was available. And she was going to do the job well, because doing the job well was the only variable she could control. When she finished, the study was quiet. Fiorello's 6 o'clock rule, he said, is a reasonable rule, she said. The braise needed another hour. I made a choice. You made the choice 4 times this week. She looked at him. You knew. I know what happens in my house. He turned his coffee cup once on the saucer. Fiorello's rule exists for a reason. The reason is not that I want my staff to go hungry. I understand. Starting tomorrow, he said, you eat when you need to eat. From the kitchen. Whatever's there. He paused. That's not a conversation. It's a correction to how things have been running. She looked at her empty bowl. She thought about the granola bar. She thought about November, which had been a kind of hunger she didn't have vocabulary for. Not just the food kind, which had come later, but the specific starvation of watching something you'd built get taken from you by someone who didn't know what it was. Thank you, she said. She meant it simply, without performance. He nodded once. He looked at her for a moment with the complete attention he seemed to give everything, and she had the specific sensation of being seen accurately, not assessed for what she could provide, not evaluated for what she had failed at, but simply understood as a person whose situation was real and who was managing it. The restaurant, he said. What was it called? Wren's. She smiled slightly, involuntarily, not particularly original. What did you serve? She told him. She told him about the menu, the Sunday gravy that had been her grandmother's, adapted, refined, made into something that honored where it came from without being nostalgic about it. The bread she baked every morning. The way she'd trained her sous chef, a 22-year-old from Roxbury named Darius, who had more instinct than she'd seen in people twice his age, and who was now working a hotel banquet kitchen because there was nowhere else. She told him about the 40 seats and the regulars and the Thursday night that had become the reservation everyone wanted, and that she had kept intimate on purpose, because she'd understood that intimacy was what she was actually selling. He listened the way he had listened before, completely, without redirecting. You'll open another one, he said. Maybe, she said. She didn't say. The debt makes maybe very small. She didn't say, I'm 27 and I've already used the scholarship and the savings and 4 years of 18-hour days, and I'm not sure there's another opening in me. She said, maybe. He heard the word correctly. She could tell from the way he didn't argue with it. It was 11 o'clock. She had been in his study for 2 hours. She should go. She said so. He stood when she stood, not ceremony, just courtesy, the reflex of a person who was raised to do it, and she registered this, filed it, and walked to the door. Wren, he said. She turned. He was looking at the desk, at something on it she couldn't see what. His expression had shifted slightly, just enough that the study's overhead light caught the edge of it. And what she saw was not the settled diagnostic patience of a man running through a problem. It was something quieter, something that had nothing to do with her and everything to do with whatever was on the desk. Good night, he said, and looked up, and the expression was gone, replaced with the neutral attention she was coming to recognize as his default. Good night, she said, and went. In the hallway, she stood for a moment with her back against the wall, letting her pulse settle, telling herself the warmth in her chest was the soup. On the desk, which she had not seen, was a seating chart for a wedding reception for 212 people, annotated in 2 different handwritings. His, and a woman named Julia's, who was 32 and beautiful and had been engaged to Nico Maranzano for 14 months, and who had stopped returning his calls 3 days ago without explanation, and who he had been trying to understand in the specific, careful way he tried to understand everything, which was thoroughly and without comfort. She didn't know any of this. She knew only the soup, and the study, and the look on his face at the desk when he thought she wasn't watching. She learned about the wedding from Fiorello. Not the details. Fiorello was not a details person, he was a logistics person. But the fact of it, the timeline, the scale. 9 days. 212 guests. The Maranzano estate in Concord for the ceremony. A rented venue in the back bay for the reception. Fiorello told her all of this because the kitchen needed to produce 6 dishes for the rehearsal dinner, and he was running the staffing numbers, and she was now, apparently, counted among the staff who would stay through the event. She absorbed this information with the professional neutrality of someone whose job was the food and not the occasion. She cooked. She ate from the kitchen the way she'd been told, at whatever hour she needed it, without asking permission. And this small thing reorganized something in her body that had been running on emergency reserves for 2 months. She felt herself returning to herself in increments. She noticed the estate, the way the winter light came through the kitchen windows in the morning, the garden that was dormant but had clearly been something spectacular in another season, the particular quality of quiet in a house where everyone moved with purpose and nothing was wasted. She saw Nico Maranzano 3 times in the next 4 days, each time briefly. Each time he stopped at the kitchen door, not entering, just present, and looked at the work in a way that was attentive without being intrusive, and said something small. Once it was about the bread. He had noticed it was the same bread she described from Ren's. Once it was a question about whether she needed anything ordered. Once it was nothing at all. He stood in the doorway for 15 seconds and then continued down the hall, and that was the one she thought about longest. On the 5th day, Giulia Ferraro arrived. Ren knew who she was immediately, not from recognition but from the specific effect she had on the house, a sharpening. Everyone slightly more correct in her presence. The way a room adjusts when someone enters who has the power to change the quality of an afternoon. She was tall and composed and wearing something that Ren's entire month's salary would not have covered. And she moved through the estate with the proprietary ease of someone who had decided it was already hers. She came into the kitchen 20 minutes after arriving. She looked at the bread. "Is this sourdough?" she said to Ren, in the tone of someone who has a strong opinion about sourdough and is not going to be interested in yours. "Yes," Ren said. "Nico doesn't like sourdough." Ren looked at the bread. "He asked me to make it this morning." Giulia looked at her, directly, fully, with the complete attention of a woman who had decided in the last 5 seconds that Ren was information worth having. "You're the new chef," she said. "Yes, how long?" 11 days. Giulia looked at her in the specific way that had nothing to do with the sourdough and everything to do with an inventory being taken. Ren held the look with the steadiness she had developed over 6 years in professional kitchens, where being looked at unfavorably was part of the weather. "How often does he come into the kitchen?" Giulia said. "I work in the kitchen," Ren said. "I don't track who comes by. That's not an answer." "It's the one I have," Ren said, and turned back to the prep table. Giulia left. Ren pressed her palms flat on the counter and breathed through the specific adrenaline of a confrontation that was not about what it was about, and went back to the prep. That evening, she heard them from the hallway, not the words, just the shape of the conversation, which had the quality of 2 people arguing through the layer of politeness they'd agreed to maintain, which made it louder in some ways than an actual argument. She went the other way. It was not her business. She made it not her business with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been making other people's pain, not her business her entire working life. She found out later from Fiorello, who found out from the housekeeper, who was not supposed to say anything and did, that Giulia had left at 9, that she had taken a bag she had apparently pre-packed, which meant she had arrived knowing she was leaving, that the conversation in the study had been 30 minutes, and that afterward, Nico had been in that room alone for a long time, and no one had gone in. What Fiorello did not know, and what Ren would not know until much later, was what had happened in the room. But she knew the shape of it from the quality of the house the next morning, the specific hushed, careful quality of a space where something has just been confirmed that everyone had suspected, and no one had said aloud. She made bread. She made coffee. She moved through the kitchen in the early morning with the precise, quiet industry of someone who understands that the most useful thing you can offer a house in grief is that the ordinary things continue. He found her at 6 in the morning, standing at the kitchen window with a mug of coffee she'd made for herself, watching the December garden. She heard him before she saw him, the particular quality of his footsteps, which she had catalogued without meaning to. She didn't turn around. "Coffee's fresh," she said. He came in. He poured a cup. He stood on the other side of the prep table from her, and they both looked at the garden, which was bare and gray and had the specific beauty of things that are waiting. "The wedding is canceled," he said. She didn't say she was sorry, because she didn't know whether sorry was accurate, and she had learned from her mother that people can always tell the difference. She said, "I know. Fiorello mentioned. He was worried about the rehearsal dinner staffing," a sound that was almost a laugh. Brief, she turned to look at him. He was looking at the garden. He had not slept, she could see that. And he had the specific composed exhaustion of a person who has decided that exhaustion is not going to be visible in his posture if he can help it. His hands were around the mug. "Still, Julia and I have been." He stopped. Started again. "We've been good at the same things. That's not the same as being right." She looked at her own mug. "No," she said. "It isn't." She left because she already knew it wasn't going to work, and I think I knew it wasn't going to work, and we were both. He looked at the garden. "We were both being careful instead of being honest." "That's a very precise distinction," Ren said. He looked at her. Something shifted, the same thing she'd seen in his face at the desk, but closer now, more visible, because it was 6 in the morning and the careful was down. "You said that like you've thought about it," he said. "I've spent 2 months being careful instead of honest," she said. "Careful sounds like fine. Careful sounds like I'm managing. Careful is what you say when you can't afford what honest costs." He looked at her for a long moment. "What would honest have sounded like?" he said. She thought about her mother's Sunday calls, about her brother's pull-out couch, about October and the 30 days and the 40 seats, and Darius in the hotel banquet kitchen. "Terrified," she said. Honest would have sounded terrified. He was quiet. She was quiet. The garden was gray and still. "The rehearsal dinner food," he said. "Don't cancel the orders." She looked at him. "The staff should eat well this week," he said. "And there's no reason the prep work shouldn't continue." He paused. "Make whatever you were going to make." She held his gaze. "For 212 people?" "Start with the bread," he said. "We'll figure out the rest." She looked at him, this man she had known for 16 days, who had sat across from her in a study while she ate his food and told him the shape of her year. And she thought, "I don't know you." She thought, "I know the important things." She thought, "Being careful instead of honest is exactly what I have been doing, and I am very tired of it." "The bread needs to proof for 2 hours," she said. "Then I'll be here in 2 hours," he said. He was. The week that followed had a different texture than the weeks before it. Fiorello restaffed the rehearsal dinner kitchen for a full estate meal instead. Word moved through the household with the specific efficiency of news that everyone is relieved to receive without knowing why, and the kitchen became, for the first time since Ren had been there. A place people moved through without the muted bracing quality of a house preparing for an occasion it wasn't sure about. She cooked. She cooked the way she had cooked at Ren's, not cautiously, not efficiently, but from the place inside her that had been quiet since October and had begun, this week, in this kitchen, to come back online. She made the Sunday gravy on Wednesday because the veal was perfect and there was no reason not to. She made her grandmother's bread pudding on Thursday and left half of it in the staff room without saying anything, and came back an hour later to find it gone, and a note from the housekeeper that said only, "Again, please." Nico was in the kitchen every morning at 6, sometimes for 5 minutes, once for an hour, sitting at the prep table with his coffee while she worked, talking about nothing in particular, a book he'd been reading, the garden's history, a question about the bread that became a longer conversation about fermentation that he participated in with genuine curiosity, not politeness. She noticed the curiosity. She noticed that he asked questions to understand rather than to fill silence. She noticed that he listened to her answers with the same quality of attention he gave everything else, as though her knowledge about yeast and time and why you couldn't rush the proof were as interesting as anything else he might spend an hour on. She noticed, on Friday morning, that she had stopped running the math on her options. This was new. She had been running the math continuously since October. How many months? How many payments? What was the minimum viable position? And the running of it had become so constant that she had mistaken it for thought. On Friday morning, she was shaping dough, and she was not running any math at all. She was thinking about the bread. She was thinking about the garden in another season. She was thinking about the 6 o'clock rule and what it would look like if it were different. And she was thinking about the 40 seats and whether 40 was the right number or whether she had chosen it for the wrong reasons. She was. She realized, thinking forward. She had not done this in 2 months. On Saturday, the envelope arrived. It was on the prep table when she came in at 5:30, placed there deliberately, not left, because it was exactly where she would see it first. Her name on the front in handwriting she recognized. She opened it. Inside, a document. 1 page, clear language, reviewed by someone who understood contracts. An offer to invest in the reopening of Ren's, not the space, which was gone, but the restaurant, which was not. A specific number. Terms she could accept without losing the thing she was protecting, which was the restaurant's character, its 40 seats, its grandmother's bread. A note at the bottom in the same handwriting. You said maybe. This makes maybe possible. She stood at the prep table and read it twice. Then she stood for a while with it in her hands, looking at the December garden through the kitchen window, thinking about what it meant to be offered a floor when you have been managing without one. Thinking about what you owe someone for that and what you don't. Thinking about the difference between a gift and a structure, and why the structure mattered to her more than the gift would have. She went to find him. He was in the study. The seating chart was gone from the desk. The room looked like itself again. Books, the old sofa, the particular quality of a space that belonged to someone who actually lived in it. She stood in the doorway. He looked up. "The terms," she said. "The investment percentage is negotiable," he said. "I want 30% lower." He looked at her. "That's a significant reduction." "I know what I'm worth," she said. "I know what the restaurant is worth. I want terms that reflect that, not terms that reflect what I was willing to accept in October." He was quiet for a moment. She held the doorframe and didn't look away. 20% lower, he said. 25. He looked at her. Something in his face. The same thing. Again. Closer. Warmer, 25, he said. She nodded. She didn't move from the doorway. She was thinking about Careful and Honest, about what she'd told him at 6 in the morning, and about the fact that she had never in her life had this particular conversation, the one where she asked for what she was worth, and someone said yes, and that it felt less like a business conversation and more like something she didn't have a category for yet. "There's a space on Tremont," she said. 44 seats. Better light than the last one. "I know the building," he said. "I know you do," she said. "It's yours." He looked at her. "The lease rate in the offer is market rate," she said. "I checked. It is," he said. "I asked someone to make sure." She looked at him. This precise, patient, thoroughly attentive man who had sat across from her on an old leather sofa and listened to her tell him the shape of her year, who had made a correction to the 6 o'clock rule in a single sentence, who had stood in her kitchen doorway on a Wednesday morning for 15 seconds without saying anything, who had canceled a wedding she didn't know about and shown up at 6 the next morning and asked what Honest would have sounded like. "Nico," she said. "Yes, I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to answer it honestly." "All right." She looked at him steadily. "Is the investment in the restaurant separate from—" She stopped. Started again. "Is this what it looks like? Or is it—" "It's both," he said, simply, without looking away. "The investment is real. The terms are fair. The restaurant will be the restaurant. None of that depends on anything else." He paused. "And it is also what it looks like." She stood in the doorway for a moment. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. She didn't move. He didn't move. The study was quiet. Outside the window the garden was gray and waiting, and the December light was coming sideways through the glass the way winter light does, finding everything. "The bread," she said finally. "It's at the end of the proof. Then you should probably—" "Yes," she said, and didn't move for another 3 seconds. Then she went back to the kitchen, and she shaped the loaves, and her hands knew exactly what to do, and she let them. 3 weeks later, the papers on Tremont Street were signed. 6 weeks after that, Darius, her sous chef from Rennes, who had been answering hotel banquet tickets for 4 months, and who said yes before she finished the sentence, started showing up at 7 in the morning to help her build the new menu. 44 seats. Better light. The Sunday gravy on the menu because it belonged there, the bread every morning because there was no version of the restaurant without it. She told her mother on a Sunday call in February. Her mother was quiet for a moment and then said, "I always knew," which was what her mother always said and which Ren had always found exasperating and which, this particular Sunday, she found she didn't mind at all. Nico came to the soft opening in March. He sat at the bar, not a reserved table, not the best seat, just the bar. Because she had told him the bar was where you could see the whole room. And he ate every course and drank 1 glass of wine and talked to Darius for 20 minutes about something she couldn't hear. When she came out of the kitchen at the end of the night, he was still there. "Well?" she said. He looked at the room, the 44 seats, the good light, the breadcrumbs still on half the tables, the sound of a restaurant that had been full and was now settling into the quiet end of its first night. "The gravy," he said. "It's better than what you described." She looked at him. "You've been waiting 4 months to say that." "I've been waiting 4 months to taste it," he said. The saying it took 4 seconds. She laughed. Actually laughed, the kind that comes from somewhere real, not the professional warmth she'd trained herself to deploy in dining rooms. He looked at her when she laughed in the way she'd come to know, which was the way he looked at things he had decided were worth his full attention. "Nico," she said. Yes, I need you to know something. All right. She looked at the restaurant. Her restaurant. The new one. The one that existed because she had fainted on a kitchen floor and woken up across from a man who asked the right questions and listened to the answers. I would have gotten here anyway, she said. Eventually, on my own. He looked at her. I know. I need you to know that I know that. I know that too, he said. And meant it. She could tell because he had never once said anything he didn't mean. In all the mornings and the conversations and the 6 o'clock corrections and the study and the document on the prep table. He had been precise about everything. He was precise about this. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. Outside, Tremont Street was doing what it did in March, the particular Boston almost spring that is still cold but differently cold. The kind of cold that has started making promises. She looked at the room one more time. She thought about October and the 30 days and the granola bar and the kitchen floor. She thought about the shape of a year that had started as the worst kind and had become, somewhere in the middle of it, something she would not have traded. She turned off the kitchen lights. She locked the door. She walked out into the March evening with a man who had waited at her bar until the end of her first night, and the city was right there, the way cities are when you are finally moving through them as yourself. The restaurant would be full again tomorrow. She had already planned the bread. Ren spent 2 months being careful when honest was what she needed to be. Careful sounds like fine. Careful sounds like managing. Careful is what you say when you can't afford what honest costs. And she couldn't afford it. Not in October. Not in November. Not until a December morning in a stranger's kitchen when the floor came up to meet her and everything changed. She didn't get saved. She got a floor to stand on. And then she built everything else herself, the same way she always had, because that was always who she was. Tell me in the comments, when did you know she was going to be okay? Was it the moment she turned back to the prep table after Julia left? When she told him terrified at 6 in the morning? Or when she stood in the doorway and negotiated herself 25%? I want to know your moment. Drop it below. If you come here for stories about women who know who they are even when everything else is gone, follow along. There's a new one every day. One more thing. Darius talked to Nico for 20 minutes at the bar on opening night. What Darius said is the reason the restaurant has a second location now. That's the next story.